where we put it right now is, are we slowly going to be just being fed stuff in the UDO that you want to keep in the UDO as is? Because if that's what's happening, then that kind of defeats the purpose of us doing away with it and starts from scratch with the old ordinance. I'm trying to see where we're going with this.
I'm going to give you recommendations of the things from the old ordinance or the new ordinance that are better or worse, and you guys can make that choice. If we want to bring just the language from the old ordinance for the Planning Commission and the DRB and the BZA and the BAR, we can. But my suggestion would be to put it all in the same section in the front of the ordinance like it is in the old ordinances, but it's not together in the old ordinances. It's all kind of interspersed.
But you're talking about not taking what's in the old ordinance, putting that together. You talk about retaining the UDO chapter on that as is.
Yeah.
Basically.
I'm going to be real honest with you. I've read both of them. It's just better. There's things where the UDO is not better, and there's things where the old ordinance is better. For that one, it's just better. It's just all together already, and it's all kind of.
Can you tell me again what chapter it is you're talking about?
Yeah. So
16 or something.
13 in the UDO, and in the old ordinances, some of it's kind of interspersed in the old ordinances. And I will give you guys the opportunity to look at those two if you want, and give me any ideas back and forth. But I guess the basis of my suggestion is that it be put in the order that the old ordinance is, just to make it easier for everyone. I don't think there was any substantive changes to any of those boards, but it's just written better in the new ordinance. I'm going to be real honest, but we can either way. So I think that would be my suggestion, but we can go either way you guys want. If you want to look at both of them and come back to me, but I would like it in the beginning of the ordinance because that just makes more sense.
How many?
Let me see if I understand you correctly, Rebecca. Section 13, administration and procedure, that's the UDO. And what is the section that's next up with that in the old?
It is. Give me 2 seconds.
That's
32-1, 32-41, 32-4,
okay.
and 32-141, and then your planning commission is 6. No, it's 20.
Yeah, I didn't really contemplate going chapter by chapter, deciding what we're going to keep out of the UDO. And how many chapters other than this do you want to take this route?
I just have topics, so they're not really chapters. It's just topics. So they're interspersed in each of the documents. I just need like answers for some of these topics.
Yeah, well, I'm not really prepared to address that this time. So.
And I guess I see that, and my frustration with it is I see the old ordinance as how things used to be done. And literally, a lot of that was done on a napkin over at Oscars. And that's how we ended up with agreements like the senior center and the chamber. And that's why this is so disorganized, is because as people wanted stuff, they just stuck it in. And you can't find it. It doesn't relate to each other. And now the county adopted something pretty close to our UDO. And we're talking about merging together and using possibly the same commercial design review boards and have the same standards between the county and the town. And we're just throwing all that out as a cooperation. So we are going to be sitting with a document that puts us in the past, not connected to anybody, and not able to cooperate with anybody. I think we could amend the UDO, rename it if you want to, but we can go through the UDO and make changes without throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Just so I am fully prepared to create a new document that meshes whatever you guys want from either side into it, and I have some recommendations. That's all I'm here to do, and I've got some questions for you for each of these topics.
Well, unless my memory fails me, this is not what we agreed to do. This is not what we, when we discussed it and had a majority of council voting for first reading. on doing away with the UDO. I understood we'd be doing away with the UDO. This is not what you're presenting to us. This is picking and choosing stuff out of the UDO at this point that you want to keep. And I'm not ready to do that. I think we need to start from the old ordinance as we talked about previously in the meetings, and I thought we were pretty clear on it. And we work from that. The old ordinances are not perfect. The UDO is also far from being perfect. So if we're looking for perfection, Bob, we ain't gonna get out either one of them.
I'm looking to be part of the modern world and be able to work with other governments.
Well, that kind of rhetoric, Bob, really doesn't put us forward. I mean,
No, but
you-
your rhetoric
you're-
would still be living in cabins.
Well,
So I,
I think that's absurd anyway.
so
You
I,
have to change as things change.
That's what
Sorry,
we're
I'll
trying
shut
to
up.
do is change the stuff in the UDO that has caused our citizens trying to do stuff with their property, headaches and heartache and all kinds of issues that they brought before different members of council.
The reasons
Maybe
that
they hadn't
you,
told you about it, they told me.
the reasons that you and Bill gave me in the beginning for changing this ordinance, all three proved to be false and mislabeled. And some councilmen went behind Flanning's back to the attorney.
I
And
can
then-
talk to this attorney whenever I want to.
Yep.
I've known him for the last
But that
30
doesn't
years.
still excuse bypassing the person that could have made the change.
If you're talking about the Patel service station, I was approached by a citizen of this town that had a problem with what he was being required to do, which was absurd. I thought so then, and I thought now, and I brought that to the attention of Mr. Parker because I needed for him to take a look at the legality of what was done. And I will continue to, when a constituent contacts me with a problem, I'll continue to talk to Mr. Parker. I'll continue to talk to anybody I need to get an answer for it.
And I don't have
And
a
as a
problem
result
with
of
that.
that, as a result of that conversation, he didn't get complete relief, but he at least got this thing fixed where he could have some use of his service station.
I have always got the same response by going to our step.
Well, we all have our different ways of operating, Bob.
Okay.
and-
so if you guys will let me, really, I promise this is not gonna take long, and there's not many more questions. There's some certain things that when you repeal and just replace it with the old zoning ordinances, there's a number of few things that I want to make sure everyone understands that you're repealing and you're replacing it with. So we'll get into those topics. So with the design section of the old ordinance versus the UDO, just the design section for the town. In the UDO, you guys adopted residential guidelines for people who are building new subdivisions. Anyone who builds more than 5, more than 4 units, they have to abide by our residential guidelines. I believe from talking with different council members, that is something that you want to be brought over, and you do not want to lapse to where even for a week, a developer could come in and build a subdivision without meeting those residential guidelines. If I'm wrong, let me know. If I'm right, then that's something that we'll make sure what makes its way back into it.
I like it because while it won't prevent it, it makes doing another rental subdivision more difficult and more expensive. And maybe they'll go somewhere else.
I disagree with Bob on that, but I do like the building. I do like that.
The residential.
That ordinance. I do, I don't think it's gonna stop American homes from rent or anything like that. If they wanna put it there, they're gonna put it there. I'm in the construction business. If you wanna build something, you can build it. But I do like the restrictions we got, the hardy plank siding. I like the curb and guttering. I like the sidewalks. South Point did that. I talked with Rebecca this morning. They did it years ago in the 80s. The developer right there with my family, they required it. When you go in South Point today, it's curb and guttering and sidewalks. The builders had to put the sidewalks in so they're continuous throughout the whole subdivision on both sides of the street. It looks great. And they spent a lot of money doing that. So they didn't make a lot of money on the subdivision. They also got a boulevard going in there that looks great. So nobody with the town required that. We didn't have any requirements back then. But they decided to do that because they wanted a nice looking subdivision. I'm a little bit familiar with our restrictions on building. I think that's gonna make Somerville, continue to make Somerville a pretty place. Rather than, I don't know what the old ordinance says, because I've always built custom houses for people and, so people in building for want nice homes. But I don't want to see a bunch of sloppy looking homes being built around town with no restrictions. So I like the restriction part of the UDO. And I don't think we ought to take a chance on going for a period of time where we don't have any restrictions where somebody could slip in and build some houses. And we get to build this satisfied. That's sort of the place to be.
Well, I believe that what Rebecca said is accurate. I think it unintentionally left out a detail. If you 5 or more, and that, I don't like to use American homes for rent, but if you're building 15 houses, it applies to you. If on the other hand, you're building 600 homes, you're coming in and you're getting a PUD. And everything is negotiated within the PUD. And these guidelines help you negotiate what you're putting in the PUD.
And one caveat to the PUD, they have to put in commercial and public space. They can't just build homes.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but since
Yeah.
we're speaking about the home side of it, so I like the fact that we've got something that guides us not only at 5 and above, but through a PUD as well. So if you'll take a look at the Hoyer UDO, we got a meeting on this, what was discussed. The entire design guidelines for the residential part of the Hoyer UDO occupied probably not even a whole page. In the UDO, it's probably 15, 20 pages of residential guidelines. Or maybe a little less. My point is there was a whole lot of stuff that was not even in the PUDs. That's where the majority of our big major building residential buildings will take place. And if we're not using the design guidelines and the PUDs, why is it so critical that we're using the exact design guidelines that are in the UDO?
So Mr. Bailey, if you
if I can finish,
yeah,
in the rest of the town. Why aren't the PUD standards exactly the same as what's good for everybody else as far as design standards?
so for the Hoyer development, if you'll remember, Hoyer and Salisbury both reference back to the UDO design standards.
I remember you said that, and I remember going over it with you, and it did not reference back.
And we changed it to where it did.
Okay.
So I'm with you. The Hoyer track came in before the UDO, and I have no idea why or how or anything of that nature, but when you pointed that out, we did fix it. So for the PUDs now, the best thing is to reference our current UDO standards for residential guidelines, so they just all meet
You
that.
mean to incorporate it?
To incorporate it. Yeah, you don't
I
want to
agree.
you don't want to incorporate every word, but you just reference whatever the section is to the code, the Somerville code. Then then the PUD document doesn't have to be 400 pages.
Yeah, but when you incorporate it, I mean,
Right.
everything's in the design ordinance has to be in the PUD.
All you say is that this development will comply with section 6 dash
Right.
blah, blah, blah of the
Yeah,
ordinance, and
right.
that's the design ordinance. So yeah. Okay. And so that's a good one. All right. The other issues with the design review board, I think that there are a couple things. The way that the BAR is treated in the old ordinance and in the new ordinance, there's the BAR guidelines, which say this is how it's set up, this is how you make an application in both sections. And then for the BAR, it references historic district design guidelines. And that's a separate link that you go to on the plating webpage. And that's a document that the BAR, and I'm guessing town council approved it years ago, that approved the guidelines. The guidelines are where the pretty pictures are that kind of give you ideas of how to do it, and where the different illustrations are that kind of give you, this is how it could look, this is what transparent talks about, blah, 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 blah. So as we take over, if you use the old ordinance for the design review board, the first thing is it's called commercial design review board, which is perfectly fine. But the second thing is you'll lose all of those kind of references for people. They are guidelines. So I think one of my recommendations after this is if we bring over and we go with the normal CDRB language that was in the old ordinance, then I think that council could work with the DRB to do exactly what the BAR has and have a guideline book. I think that would be easier for them. That'd be easier for y'all. And my suggestion would be that you guys have a council workshop with the DRB and talk with them about some of the issues that we've talked about through this process. Some of the questions they brought up were, what does council want to see in Oak Brook or on North Main or on trial, different places? That's just probably not a conversation that's ever been had. And I think that would help guide them a little bit in their process. I think we'd also like to have legal counsel come and have some discussions about, these are the things that the design review board should do, and caution everyone about what those kind of bumpers are and how we stay in those bumpers whenever we're reviewing different design projects. So I think my recommendation would be you bring over just from the old ordinance, the language for the DRB or CDRB, and then we'll start working with the DRB, the group, on guidelines, and you guys just meet and talk to them. That's not something I can solve between now and April 9th or 8th.
So let me ask you something, that compare the two instruments, the old ordinance and the new UDO. The design review board, do they have more input with the UDO or less?
I don't think it changed what their purview was, except for the fact it extended it. Before it was apartments and any commercial. It did, you guys added on that townhomes in developments of over 5 had to then go to the DRB also. So that's really the only extension of their power. The old ordinance didn't have any guidelines or any picture recommendations or anything. The new ordinance does, which depending on who you talk to, that either helps them or hurts them. So I think there needs to be some discussion about the pictures and the illustrations to figure out what it is that would actually be helpful to people, because they are just merely guidelines.
Well, what I'm looking for is when people come to the town to build or build their property, I don't want to make it tougher for them to do it because we passed the UDO. That's why I'm asking that your UDO allow them a little bit more leniency than the UDO.
I will tell you that for the DRB, the Design Review Board, in the old ordinance, it just didn't have any guidelines, and the new one does. So that might make it, I don't know if that makes it, it depends. It could make it more difficult if they try to follow strictly by those pictures and pretty pictures and illustrations. But for people who don't have any idea, say the mayor and I were talking about this today, who come from out of town and want to know kind of what we're looking for, those pictures might help you. So it's not there's nothing in the DRB design regulations that say you have to build a building that looks like this. Nothing in the old one and nothing in the new one.
Is there a statement to highlight that before they read it?
In the design guidelines?
Because maybe that's something we could all add to the new. These are conceptual. If you want to do something different, come talk to us.
It says, just says design guidelines, and most people would interpret guidelines as just being that guidelines, but
Maybe make that more clear.
yeah, so, but I do, that would be my recommendation, is to treat it like you treat the BAR. They have a separate document that's a design guideline document. If you haven't looked at the BAR one, I hadn't looked at it, so I just looked at it yesterday. You can kind of see what I'm talking about. And it's just a guideline document. A lot of other towns have like a design book or that they hand to people that kind of gives them a color ideas and different things for their historic district. It's just kind of like that to make it easier.
And the CDRB would be similar other than the old historic homes and things like that. Or is it completely different?
It's a little, the BAR is very specific about the architectural details that make it a property historic. And they get into all kinds of stuff. The mayors can tell you. It's,
Like window panes and all that.
yeah, it's
Which
tough.
I think it's good.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, the commercial design review board now is a different story.
Okay.
They kind of get out of line sometimes, but, back in, when I talked about that this morning, but, you know, and yesterday, you know, overall, it's probably not a bad board. There's been times, depending on the council, they want to do it, because they, what they do is they can, and it takes them 3 months to, after staff has pretty well said, okay, this is a pretty good project, you know, on a commercial building. And then it goes to the commercial design review board and they take another 3 months. That's costing somebody a lot of money. And in the end, they approve it, you know, so that's not good. But I think what Rebecca said is we need to probably have a meeting with them, let them know that.
Okay.
You know, I think probably overall, they probably are pretty good board. They just need to listen out, staff a little bit. They get all hung up in their meetings because they watch them on that Zoom thing. And, they get talking, they talk themselves right out of a nice looking building.
I will say one of our, as you guys work through the process, one of the staff recommendations that we will have will be that once a building has gotten conceptual approval or preliminary approval with conditions, that the owner be able to meet those conditions and staff be able to approve it, to try to save a month, because you're coming back to them 30 days later to meet the conditions they said. Well, technically, if that's a drawing, if you can get your architect on it, you could change the drawing in 3 days and bring it back to them and get approval. So that's something that we would like to do. It's actually something Madeline recommended when I had her look at the design review board, just to try to make it easier, make it quicker and easier, and not another staff meeting, not another meeting, not another, you know, because their agendas can get kind of stacked. So that's one of our recommendations as you guys go through it and make amendments to this stuff later. Other section that I wanted to make sure you guys understood, that if you go with the old ordinances, what that means to you. The old ordinances did not have any parks and open space requirements in it. None. So now if you come in, if you're building a subdivision that's more than 4 houses, so 5 or more houses, you have open space and park requirements in them that you have to meet. If you can't meet those, there's actually a fee in lieu of that, just like with the trees, if you can't meet the tree requirements, there's a fee in lieu of outlined in it. So that's something I want to make sure that if we repeal and replace it completely with the old ordinances, that does not address open space or parks requirements for subdivisions over 5. So kind of want to get your stamp, because I don't want us to do that and someone come in the next day again and us not be able to require open park space. So it's kind of an unintended consequence I wanted to make sure you guys knew about.
There may be, the majority of that might be something that we want to keep. There may be things in it that we don't want to keep. The same with the design guidelines. I mean, but what you're having us do is just bring everything over, or wanting us to do, bring it over lock, stock, and barrel. And until we got this meeting, we didn't know which parts of the UDO you want to keep, which you didn't, so we couldn't do any homework ahead of time to
Yeah.
know if we wanted to take all or part of the design guidelines or all or part of the open space requirements. So I'm really.
Well, I think giving us, I'm sorry to interrupt you, giving me this input, that tells me what I need to do to get you something to look at. Before, if no one's interested in open space, well, I'm not going to spend time trying to convert it to different numbers or anything. So I'm trying to cut down on how long it takes us to actually give you guys something to look at. If it's something you're not interested in, then I'm not going to spend any time on it. But I feel like parks and open space is something that the majority of you guys want us to require subdivisions to do. So if we send you that section, then you can look at it. If there are things you want to strike out of it, then you can.
When can we expect that in relation to when our next monthly meeting?
I can't tell you, maybe Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, about the middle of next week, maybe. It depends on how much more you tell me. Because until I have these answers, then we can work on things, but there's no rhyme or reason, so we're just doing work 3 times over if I don't
Yeah.
know, so.
Just an observation in this, I recognize that the last meeting when we made a motion to repeal and replace the UDO, that was the motion. However, within the discussion of that motion, or prior to or after the motion was made and approved, we did say if there were elements of the UDO that staff felt we needed to keep to protect us for one reason or another, or because it was inherently better than what we had, we wanted staff to bring that to us, which is what I see you doing today, whether or not we've had enough time to study it, and whether enough time, I think you're asking for direction if I'm understanding it. And, you know, if I could back up to 13, I don't know what all's in 13, but it seems to me there's not a lot of thou shalt in 13. It's information that you're working on. That's the administration and procedure chapter, Walter. Yeah, that it appears to me when I look at that is how do we apply and how do things apply versus you got to do this. So I look at that and say it's organized. It's not punitive. It's clarity. And so you know, as long as we're looking at 1 or 2 or 3 things in the UDO that may be better than what we have or clearer than what we have, but I don't see that working against what the intent was we had. And if there's 10 of them, I do.
Yeah, and that was my point earlier when I asked Rebecca how many more chapters did she want to keep other than 2.
Yeah, and I think that chapter is kind of the root of this whole problem. Not the UDO itself, but how is it applied and acted on? And that went awry for a little while, and some misinformation got involved with the arraignment. And I think communicating with staff on what changes we want to the UDO and how it should be applied as a guideline would be a real good way to go, instead of scratching and starting out with, people say the old ordinance worked. I highly question that, because there's some real messes in town that came under this ordinance.
And Bob, you know, my intent is certainly not to argue here, but there's a majority of council, clearly a majority of council that is going to repeal the UDO.
Mhm.
So for us, any of us, I think us arguing about that part of it is not helping us get to a better place. And but my hope is that they're all old ordinances that have their problems that we said we want to go back to. And it's certainly part of that needs to be changed and reorganized. And there's parts of the UDO that are okay and parts of it that ain't. And so you got to get rid of one to fix the other.
Yep, and I was agreeing with you, Gary. I wasn't arguing.
Okay.
I think what you said on 13 is right. And I think it's possible that staff stuck a little more to the guideline than what council would have liked.
Yeah.
And if that understanding would have been made, then things may have been done very differently and we wouldn't be where we are.
Okay.
Okay, I can be done in like 10 minutes, so,
Second.
yeah, well, it depends on y'all. So there are 2 with the subdivision and infrastructure standards. And again, these are the topics. There are a chapter in the UDO, but in the old ordinances, roads were in chapter 20. So what I will tell you in talking with Russ from chapter 5 and chapter 20 is that chapter 20 went in, chapter 5 was very short. It had the basics in there. It didn't have any standards for roads like this, you know, we want this road to be this wide with this much sidewalk and blah, blah, blah. It just was very basic. And my question for you guys, and this is something for you to look at between the two of them, is when you look at that, do you think that the way the UDO presents it, understanding that some of the language is literally same. So if you go through my ordinances, there will be S's beside chapters in each of those. Those are ones where it's the exact same language in each document. When with the UDO document, it's the same language, but then they added in some graphics to show developers how you wanted all of the different categories of roads. In the UDO, it was literally one little table that says alley, local street, collector street, divided street. So there's that. In the new one, it does have pictures and things of that nature. My question for you guys and what I would like for you to look at is with the additions of the pictures and the addition of explaining how the process and the requirements work. If you talk to Russ, and we can have a meeting with him too, the actual processes didn't change. They're now just put in a document, whereas before it was just how they did it. But you didn't know that's how they did it until you went and talked to someone because it wasn't written down anywhere. I don't have a strong preference either way. I think that if they don't, if we go with everything that was in the old ordinance and don't add in the explanations that are in the new ordinance, then we may do something of the same that we were talking about with the BAR and the DRB. You have something you can send to someone and says, this is how I want to road do it. I just think that's easier when you're dealing with people, so they know, they can figure it out. This is how I'm building an alley, and this is what the alley should look like. It should be this wide, it should be this thick, that sort of thing. So those are all road kind of engineering standards that I want you guys to look at and just figure out what you think is better. It's, it's just a question.
Russ, is it gonna make a difference to you which one we use?
I would prefer to use the new book. It does give more guidance to developers and actually more flexibility on road types and where, depending on what type of road and where the implementation of it.
Thank you.
But like,
I forgot you were here, Russ. I'm sorry.
so the process is still the same. The design,
I think what you were telling, that you just kind of put it in writing how the operating procedure was before, but now someone can go and say, okay, this is how I get a road approved. This is the type of road I'm building. This is what it has to look
it
like.
was in writing before. It's better explained.
Okay.
I revised that ordinance in 2006. Requirements. We've been working on that since then. We've got some bonding requirements back then as well. The way it's written now, the video is better, more clearly written, and gives developers more options for different types of roads, commercial development or subdivision.
And that bonding was important in Oak Brook when they built those apartments. They used Latson extension and they agreed to repave it when they were done. And when they left, it was almost like gravel. And we ended up repaving it.
You can use that bond money to repave it. So that's a question for you guys to look at. The next topic is parking and driveways. And from discussing this is the same thing kind of as the UCMX, the mixed use discussions about parking, whether you allow parking in front, side, or back, and what you allow in what district. I think that's going to take a whole lot more conversation than we're all willing to do today or know what to do today. I think there are a lot of ideas rolling around. So that one's just a whole other ball of wax. I think that if you want to, the old ordinance addresses parking some in the back at the end. So we just need to kind of figure out how you guys want to look at that with the parking. We can just leave what's in the old ordinance, but understand that does leave, some deficits on different requirements, and we would need to go back and try to address those.
Well, I understand that with the UDO that system that's got more things laid out as to what can happen when there's a building to be built or a commercial building or whatever. And the old ordinance is not that specific, but I think the UDO is problematic from the standpoint of it's just a little bit too much rules and regulations. You know, the property over there on Happy Step there, that I'm dealing with now, people wanting to put approximate
Parking up front.
parking in front of the house. And the UDO said you can't do that because you can't have one, you know, how we said in their corridor, you can't have it in front of the house. To me, that's something that, with the old UDO, the old ordinance, it wouldn't have been a problem. And I think I can understand that codifying things that the UDO does a better job. But the old ordinance had flexibility to allow people to fit things in situations that they may not fit under the UDO. So what I'd like to do is have that flexibility, restore some of those flexibilities that we're missing with the UDO. It's making it tough for people to do certain things. And I know that we've got to protect the town and make sure that in certain areas, we have to have certain rules to make sure people just don't do it. Doesn't fit. I think the parks and recreation parks, where they have to have parks and open space, that's very important too. But if you look at the Brownsville area, for instance, where people may have someone wants to give their child a piece of land behind their house or whatever. The old ordinance, they had more flexibility if it was 2 feet short or something like that. The UDO, it seems to be so stringent that they may not be able to do it. So those are some of the things that when I look at the UDO, it's problematic in my district.
So that was one of the things that Mr. Bailey helped staff with, was putting back in the administrative adjustment that was in there before, allowing if you don't meet things exactly, for them to be able to give flexibility in that. So I definitely think that. And I think with the property on 78, I think we talked about it a little. One, you have the 78 corridor and the fact that eventually that's going to be probably 5 lanes, so you don't want people to build too close to that. The other issue, and this is just something that I will say, is people need to ask when they go to the DRB or go to staff, they need to ask for what they really and truly want in the beginning. And if things change, they need to then just come and tell them. It's not that, I mean, they'll probably get a variance to be able to do whatever they want to do, but had they have asked for that in the beginning, just like with Mr. Patel, he just didn't know, or not even Mr. Patel, with his contractor, didn't know to ask the question. because
He was at the meeting. And
Yeah.
He said he did ask for some stuff that.
Okay.
And,
I think if you present to staff, like these are my real issues and these are the things that I really can't do or don't want to do, then there are some flexibility in there for people to be able to come and to make those changes.
If I might speak, and Mr. Patel has been brought up a couple of times. In addition, he was at the meeting. And there was building something that exceeded 25% of the total space, so it triggered the UDO. And so he had existing property laid out there, accessible pumps and all that. But one of the things that they required him to do, and he couldn't figure out why, he's got like a 10-foot backyard behind the building. And at the end of that 10 feet, there's a privacy fence to separate that from the adjacent property. The other side is blocked off by an ice machine. And nobody can see behind that place. They required him to do plantings back there, make a garden out of it that nobody would ever lay their eyes on. It's like telling somebody to landscape a crawl space. So, but he was at the meeting and he didn't want to do that, and they made him do it anyway.
And I think that was the DRB meeting, correct? So that was the DRB
Yes.
that required him to do those things, yeah.
Using UDO as a hammer to do it.
I think that as we've seen, if Jessie was consulted with that, I mean, she figured out a way to fix it in 2 days. So if maybe, and you know, that it happened 2 years ago. I think that if we could have all gotten together really early on, I think we could have solved the problem a lot quicker, even before they went to the DRBs. But I wasn't here, and that was a while ago. It was 2019, right? It was 2019, December of 2019.
It was actually approved under the old ordinance.
Was it? Oh, yeah, it was, 'cause it came into effect, yeah. think that gets into the DRB and understanding what their purview is and understanding when they should require people to bring things up to the new standards. And that has a lot to do with the last thing I'm going to talk about, which is the non-conforming uses, but we'll get to that. Actually, I think we're almost there. Yeah, we got two more. Tree preservation. If you go from the old ordinance, the new ordinance to the old ordinance, this is going to sound backwards when I say this, but in the old ordinance, protected trees were 6 inches and above. In the new ordinance, it's 8 inches and above, which means the new ordinance is actually more lenient than the old ordinance. So my question for you guys, just because that was a change, a big change, 2 inches doesn't mean a whole lot, but for trees, it does, when you're trying to, especially on a wooded lot in the town of Somerville, that's the difference between the types of trees that have to be preserved. So 6 inches, 8 inches, trees, that's something that, you know, I don't want us to let that slip through. And then we go back to the old, more restrictive requirements and someone lose their minds over it to you guys.
So 6 inches or 8 now.
8.
8 inches or more, yeah.
I think 8. I think 6
I
was.
think we'll leave the tree lines alone.
Have y'all received any other, I know that, you know, obviously trees are very important in the town and we have a committee and we have a whole employee dedicated to that. Have you received any other big complaints about the tree preservation section as it goes in the new section or the old section? I haven't had any work with any of it.
Only about Dominion, that's a different story.
Only time I get a complaint is when Peter Wallace won't let somebody cut a tree.
Well, I can't help you there. That's another committee. That's not a, so. If you,
My only complaint is, I know there's a distance that they will approve it if it's, you know, to the house, close to the house. And, you know, there's a lot of people that, I don't know what that distance is, but there's a
Yeah.
lot of people that are over that distance by a little bit. And, you know, they get angry.
Yeah.
Because they feel that it's still damaging, you know, to the bottom area, to the, you know, or it could fall on their house, etc.
Well,
I don't know what to do.
I have a son-in-law in Newington and his daughter plays in the driveway and dead limbs are falling on the truck and in the driveway and they couldn't cut it down because it's like 12 feet away from the house. So now his kid hangs from a tree in a swing.
well, as you're thinking about things, that's a big one. I know that's really important with the tree preservation, with the old ordinance and the new ordinance. The 8, no matter what, we will keep it at that. And we can look and talk about the distance from the houses too, if there's anything. But I know that that's a very big topic. I've never been in a place that had a tree ordinance. So this is a whole new ball of wax for me.
The one issue I've heard, not directly, this was kind of secondhand. There was an individual wanted to cut a tree that was in the middle of his lot that he was gonna build a house on. And he was told he couldn't cut it, he'd have to move the house to a different location on the lot. Now, I'd always assumed that you had a right to put your house wherever you wanted and take down whatever tree was there. And, but we have the tree committee placing houses on lots. And is it supposed to be doing that, in your opinion?
I don't know much about the tree ordinance. I mean, I think they can be pretty strict. Either you mitigate, move the house or mitigate cutting down that tree. So pay for or put other trees in place. Is that right?
Yeah, I just hadn't heard in the past of them requiring you. Usually you came in and said, this is where I want my house. And it was understood the trees would have to be cut up to 10 feet around that footprint.
Right, and there was, if I recall correctly, I don't remember verbatim language in there that encouraged folks to try to site their house
Yeah.
or their building with respect to existing trees, particularly grand trees. Can't give you an example off the top of my head where people have chosen to site their houses differently on the lot with that, I want to say request or with that requirement. but with
Makes a
that
difference in which
suggestion.
one it was.
Right. That
They have,
suggestion.
they have made those changes. In my experience, if it couldn't be done, the tree committee approved it, approved them to be able to put the house right there. I've not worked with tree committee in almost 5 years, so.
Yeah.
I don't know that.
Thank you.
Yeah, what they've done.
I haven't participated in one of those meetings either, but I hear that they can be quite lengthy. So, okay, there, other big question for you guys with the sign requirements from the old ordinance to the new ordinance. In the, one big thing, the new ordinance complies with the Supreme Court ruling about content neutrality for signs. So whichever one we use, we have to put language in there that complies with that, because our old ordinance doesn't comply and we'll get sued. So there's that. The second one is the new ordinance. The only signs that have to go to the DRB in the new ordinance are master development signs. So you know, like the big azalea square sign with all that, or changeable copy signs, as long as it's not a church or institution. So that would mean if we go strictly back to the old ordinances, all signs will in the commercial district will go to all commercial signs will go to the DRB. So and this is a case where I believe the new ordinance in that right made it easier on business owners. There's signs that can be approved by staff unless it's the big changeable copy sign or the big master plan sign for a development, a commercial development. So that's an unintended consequence that we will all get complaints on the minute it happens if we change that completely. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd like to leave it with staff to do the signs. I'm telling y'all, I've had problems with the commercial design with the signs.
I will say
It's
it
a lot
does.
easier with staff.
I will say they have, the new ordinance has an exemption in there that if a person wants something that the staff can approve by ordinance, then they can still go to the DRB for a variance or an exception. And the DRB can give them something that staff can approve. You know, I don't know what that would be, the staff wouldn't approve, but if it's something extraordinary that staff couldn't approve in DRB, it can go to DRB for a variance, so. The last chapter, or the last kind of big topic, which is where I believe we have most of our concerns about, is the non-conforming use section of the old ordinance and the new ordinance. And I say this, that most places have a problem with this. Either the old ordinance is to me is way too lenient, and the new and it's only like 2 paragraphs. And the new ordinance is way too strict and way too wordy. So I would like if you guys would let us to make a suggestion for it that's in between both of those. The old ordinance, like I said, is 2 paragraphs and doesn't really address everything that could be a non-conforming use. The new ordinance is like 8 pages and addresses everything you could possibly consider. So
Yeah, but you know, getting back to what I'm talking about, we can go back to the old ordinance and tweak it some and add some additional
Yeah.
Language that would take the time and at the same time give people some space to do some of the things like what Walter was just talking about. So, I mean, it's, I see first past the UDO, I didn't see what I see now. I've seen a lot of problems with that. About even though the UDO qualified instruments. There will always be times when people need things, but they need things to make something work.
yeah, as long as and I think that you want to give staff the flexibility to be able to make those types of calls. But there has to be some sort of standard, because you can't just arbitrarily say this guy has to follow it and this guy doesn't have to follow it. But I think the new ordinance is a little too much and the old ordinance is just 2 paragraphs. So if we could amend the old ordinance and add a little bit more detail and make it a little bit to where it verbally gives staff that comfort that they can make that variance. So a lot of the issues with flexibility from a staff perspective is I need my job and I don't want to get fired. So I'm going to make people follow the rules so that I don't get, so someone doesn't come back to me and say I've done something wrong. So you need to kind of, as much as you can, put that flexibility in writing and make your staff person feel comfortable to use that flexibility, that it's something that you want, not something that they're going to get in trouble
The
for.
flexibility can be very, very helpful depending on who's exercising the flexibility. I mean, they can exercise that in favor of the homeowner or in favor of the regime. I think we've had some of the wrong kind of flexibility that was exercised.
And I think that comes in the wording of the document and explanation to staff of the flexibility and how we want them to use that. And that's an easy thing to do. So that's all my topics. The only other one I will say is the water management section that the planning commission is picking it up next Thursday's meeting, Monday, sorry. That you guys have been sent a draft of that, and if you have any concerns or anything, if you would let us know. There have been revisions made to the buffer and stream section that were sent out to you guys. I think GW sent them to you or Jesse sent them to you. Maybe GW, did you do it?
The only person I sent it to, Council Jacobs, because he called me and asked me about it. I figured, I thought Jesse had done about this. And then.
Okay.
And looking at that, a concern of mine in that water management, is that where the buffers for the river are?
Right, so the first section of the water management, which was the first section of flood management, that's the only thing really in that water management section that's not based on FEMA requirements or stormwater requirements. So that was something that was added from what I'm told because certain council members wanted it to be added. So it's not something that's not a FEMA requirement that we put it in there, but it's in there now. Jesse's made changes to it and GW's made changes to it, and that's what he'll send out to you guys.
In that ordinance, if I remember right, you're allowed to use 30% of it, 30% of the water frontage to gain a view. Or, okay. So, I mean, that's an issue that brought me to council because under the old ordinances, they were going to put condos, or not condos, but townhouses where Oak Brook Preserve is now. And those buffers aren't just view. That stops litter from blowing into the river and the creeks. It's a passage of water from the development to the river that filters out. It's a pollution problem. It helps a pollution problem, water quality problem, and a visual problem, because under the old ordinances here in North Charleston, both the Oak Brook Preserve and the old Kings Grant golf course, that would all be houses. So we would have a terrible view from before Somerville all the way to Charleston where it's already developed out. And I strongly feel that we need to keep those buffers to protect the river's health and the view of the river. And we're trying to build up a attraction of the river. And it's not attractive if you have development going down both sides of the river. I'm sorry.
Bob, the reason I voted, one reason I voted, probably the main reason to bring that park in and pay for that was because it was owned by the town at some point commercial. And there was, and I feared that was exactly what you said would happen. There'd be some ugly, cheap, low-end restaurant or something there. So the only way to stop that, I thought was to go ahead and make it in the park. I'm glad we did it. I grew up on that river camping and canoeing and all that, so I've got an attachment to it also. But I've got a totally different view on the buffer. I don't have any waterfront property. I used to, but I don't have it now. But if that buffer requirement that we're talking about, the 150 feet, had been in place to Martha Middleton, built Middleton Place, you wouldn't be able to see the house from the river. You wouldn't be able to see the steps coming down and all that. He's got grass laid out in the water. So it isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I feel like if somebody is gonna spend their life savings buying waterfront property, which it isn't cheap, they're gonna take care of that property. They're gonna keep it clean. They're not gonna, a bird doesn't soil its own nest. I mean, they're not gonna throw trash in the river in front of the property. I just don't think that's gonna happen. And I think it's pretty, takes a lot of audacity for a municipal governing body to tell somebody that wants to buy a piece of property and build a house on it, that they can only see 25% of the waterfront because somebody else floating down the river may be offended by looking at his house. I have no problem seeing an occasional house along the river. I mean, it's just, it's part of life. I mean, it's not all woods.
I'm sorry.
And the addition to GW did not, as I read it, did not eliminate the 150 foot.
The way that it's read, and now, as I said, I'll send it to you, the way that it's worded now, there's an exclusion for single family dwelling to address just what you said. If somebody wants to have a view of the water, then planning can adjust those requirements so that all they're looking at is the forest and they don't see the water. So the way that I worded, I tried to strike a balance to keep ugly things from big apartment complexes or whatever they might be with the runoff going into the river, but yet preserve an individual family member who said they're going to sink a lot of money into. Even if he doesn't, if it's just a shack, and they want to go down there on the weekend and look at the river, they'll be able to do that. I think.
Okay, well, I'll just preserve my comments on seeing it because I thought that what we were talking about was an additional section that said you had a 25% cut you could make through the property. It seemed to apply to all the property.
It does have that, but then there's an exemption for single family lots. So
Okay.
yeah, when
I
you
didn't
see
get
that,
that.
yeah.
I think part of the problem is, I can't remember verbatim, but part of the problem is wording. So if I'm building my house, first off, tell me 150 feet back, that's too far, for me. But when you're looking at what's in front of the river, the way it reads, you really can't take anything out. I mean, you got 25%. I don't understand why you got to keep shrub tree, which it says you do. All the shrubs and trash and trees and
Stumps.
bushes and all that other kind of stuff that somebody who has a piece of property, or me, would go down there and clean that out. I'd leave trees and I'd put other stuff that I wanted to see there. And reading that into the ordinance, I don't know how you do it, but that's common sense of how you want to provide a view. You don't have to cut trees down to provide view, but you need to be able to clear out the trash. You need to be able to limb up trees. You need to be able to do other things that allow you to make the river, that part of the river, your river view. I don't know how you do that in the ordinance, but that's my concern with the writing of it.
We'll send that out to GW, can send that out to you guys. Those are the ends of, that's the end of my topics. That gives us good guidance of where.
I thought you said the other day we were talking something about definitions.
Oh, God, no, yeah, I didn't really mention that. The administration section of, all right, this is gonna be a little bit complicated, but not really. In the old ordinance, the definitions are interspersed out through the different sections of the ordinance, and they're at the beginning of the ordinance. In the new ordinances, the definitions are in the back, which I don't suggest, but the definitions are all together. And one of the things that the planning commission said was, what was that, Mr. Jeff Johnson? I can't remember Jeff, the guy who emailed us and I emailed you guys.
Several suggestions.
Yeah, just suggested that we use the new definitions from the UDO because it covers everything and they're all together in one place. And then my suggestion would be that, you know, do you put them in the front before people go through the document, or do you put them in the rear like a glossary? My suggestion would just be in the front. I mean, that's kind of a real simple thing.
If we start off with the old section, revert back to it like the first folks said we're supposed to be doing, then we get the definitions out of the UDO as you suggest, and then we can define stuff that's not in the ordinance.
We can double check and make sure there's nothing that's not in there that's in the definitions. The new definitions just meet, you know, it includes things that we're dealing with today and that we weren't dealing with before. And the definitions have just been updated. So we can make sure it's nothing that, there's nothing that isn't actually then referenced in the document anymore. We're just trying to use the better version of the more, I guess, up-to-date version of some of these things that when this ordinance was written, that things just weren't contemplated like they are now. I mean, you know, you've got to have a definition for everything now. And that gets you in trouble when you're dealing with things like sexually oriented businesses or home occupations or group homes and different things like that, where you just want to have the most up-to-date definition so that you can use it to then prohibit or allow things you want to allow.
Okay.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions or anything, or? Our goal will be to try to get you something to look at. This gives us some good guidance to try to figure out what to pull. We've already started. Beth has helped a lot. Myself, Jesse, Carrie has helped. So this kind of gives us a good place to start, and we can get something to you.
Okay.
I would like to say it was only an hour and 22 minutes. And I think we started late too.
Good job.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah,
You-
yeah.
Number 3.
What do you want?
It's on the next item on the agenda.
Consideration of contract agreement for moving condemned structures.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, you want to let Russ bring that up?
Yes, sir, we have street structures on the Main Street project that don't approach this like move those structures. Property owners. That is written for you. All this stuff that you're around. Easy. Ready for the sign, pay the sign, to be able to do it. Once council passes this, with the sign, this is approved.
I make a motion that council authorize the Director of Public Works to enter into a no-cost contract between Michael Mitchell and the Town of Somerville for to move some condemned properties to 224 Shamrock, 701 North Maple, 605 North Maple.
Can we, as we do this, might we add by June the 1st? That's a couple of months.
Once we have, we agree to it, yeah, once you do a notice to proceed, that's 60 days.
Okay.
Okay.
He's got to provide insurance and all that.
It'll be right around.
Okay, that's okay. I mean, it's a drop dead.
Yeah, 60 days once you get a notice to proceed.
Okay.
Motion made and seconded. Any other discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye. Raise your right hand. Any opposed, ayes carried.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned, seconded. All in favor,